I will present here is just the first sketches of a proposal whose aim is to try to reconcile two fields that may look very different in principle, and many would think that they have nothing to do with each other. But we will see that they are actually more connected than many would imagine, which are the field of parapsychology and biology. So, as a brief introduction, there have been outstanding advancement in the field of parapsychology during the last decades. But, this is my own point of view as a biologist. I think that the entire field of parapsychology still lacks a proper biological framework. Many great efforts have been made to try to shorten the gap between parapsychology and biology, but most of them have been addressed from an anthropocentric view. And just to exemplify this, many of them do not give sufficient weight to the results from the field of animal psi, also known as ANPSI. So my proposal here is that by analyzing different pieces of complementary and concordant evidence from parapsychology and other disciplines, through an approach known as consilience of inductions, we can arrive at a scenario in which psi is anything but paranormal. And so we might be able to establish, obviously relatively in time, its possible origin and its further evolutionary path. Well, so what is consilience of inductions? It is a principle which states that the evidence from independent and non-related sources can converge onto strong conclusions. It was developed by the philosopher of science, William Whewell, by the mid-19th century, and it involves the use of independent measurement methods, which can share few or no features at all. This method is very useful when we are dealing with historical problems from different branches of knowledge. Well, obviously history, but also in natural science, which are historical in nature, such as cosmology, geology, and obviously biology. And to sum this up, if two sequences of inductive reasoning from apparently different classes of phenomena point towards the same conclusion, we can say that a consilience of induction has occurred. So I just want to briefly exemplify how this method has been successfully applied in what I think is the biggest historical problem in evolutionary biology, which is the origin of life on Earth. As of today, there are no traces, and I think that they will never be found, of what is called the primitive soup, which is it has been the most successful theory of the origin of life proposed by biochemist Alexander Oparin more than a century ago. Nor can we travel back in time to the very moment in which the first living being arose on this planet. But what gives support to this theory? What makes this theory so difficult to bring down? It is different pieces of evidence which are strongly correlated, and this evidence come from different fields of knowledge, and altogether they support the existence of this so-called primitive soup. I just exemplify a few of them, like the biochemical composition of all living organisms, the organic components of numerous chondritic, which is carbonaceous meteorites, and the products obtained in prebiotic chemistry experiments. So although they use different methods and very different experimental designs, the conclusions from each of these lines of research are basically the same. So they are considered to be strong enough to support the Oparin's theory. And something like that is what I am proposing here. I'm going to mention a series of pieces of evidence that point to a natural history of psi. The first one is, that psi is not paranormal, but natural and normal. And here we have information coming from different surveys around the world. Well, typically psi experiences are thought to be just hallucinations or the product of self-delusion or extraordinary coincidences in the best cases. In the worst, they are just considered to be fraud. And many mainstream scientists believe that they are just the product of brain malfunctioning. But if we look at many most, almost all of the surveys that have been applied to different populations around the world, we will find that they're quite the opposite. They are ordinary and have occurred to millions of people around the world. And also, if we go to the historical record, we will find accounts of these experiences throughout history and around the world. So we cannot say neither that they are normal nor paranormal. Well, the second piece of evidence is that psi has not only been detected in human subjects, but in a great diversity of non-human subjects. And different psi abilities have been tested, like precognition, clairvoyance, micro-PK, telepathy, another one called psi trailing. And they involve different subjects like dogs, birds like finches and chicken, other mammals like cats, rats, and even goldfish. So if we look at this, at least initially suggests that psi may be present in the whole vertebrate clade. Well, all of these are vertebrates. And also that this capability may have arisen before the divergence of this group. Well, another one is that many of the core brain structures of the vertebrate brain are conserved in basically every vertebrate we look at. And well, given the similarity of psi with other cognitive processes, it seems very obvious that one or more brain structures are involved. And such structures would be expected to be the same in different groups of vertebrates, although there might be slight differences. For example, additional ones could be involved only in specific groups of vertebrates. And this coincides with what Jan Ehrenwald proposed back in the 1970s. She proposed that psi's neural basis may lie in an ancient brain structure and that it should be independent of lateralization. And she was not talking in evolutionary terms. She only looked at the experimental results carried out in humans, but it makes a lot of sense if we look at it in evolutionary terms. She proposed that the brain stem and the reticular formation could be involved in could be the center for psychic functioning. These two structures altogether are involved in the processing of sensory stimulus, in monitoring of alertness and wakefulness, in modulation of motor activity, and in the regulation of emotions. But well, we have another brain structure which is equally ancient, which are the basal ganglia. And these, well, all of the structures that are made of this brain structure are associated with motor learning and cognitive and emotional function, like decision making and motivation, but also with what are called the superior cognitive processes, like intuition and well, superior cognitive function. And both, why did I mention these two structures? Well, not only because of their function, but also because those are among the oldest invertebrates and are universally conserved throughout this group. Well, we have another piece of evidence that gives indirect support to the previous one, and it is that the outer layers of the brain seem to inhibit psi functioning. This comes from a series of experiments performed by Maurice Friedman and his collaborators. They proposed a neurobiological model in 2003, which states that the frontal lobes could be some sort of filter or inhibitor of psychic function. In this paper from 2003, they evaluated subjects with left frontal lobe damage, and they found that they usually perform better than the subjects from a control group in micro PK tasks. And they successfully repeated this experiment 15 years later in 2018. And most recently, about a year ago, where they found basically the same results, but in normal subjects with temporary inhibition of left medial frontal lobe by reverse transcranial magnetic stimulation. And also the main agent in a poltergeist-like case, which was investigated by UPIDE members and which involved our different episodes of RSPK and also apports. Well, this guy, a middle-aged guy, suffered from brain damage, as you might imagine, in the left frontal and temporal lobes a few months before all of these strange episodes started. And finally, the final piece of evidence comes directly from evolution. Well, it's in an evolutionary framework, and it is that psi confers some degree of evolutionary advantage. Here, it is important that we try to identify such advantages that could be common to a great diversity of species, not only to humans, and especially those related to survival or reproduction. For example, Robert Sheldrake has suggested that the feeling of being stared at and the telepathic connection between mothers and babies could be among the oldest known psychic abilities and also among the more widespread in animals and in humans. And these examples suggest that psi may not be used at will, but that it could be a process like intuition and emerge only under very specific situations. And additionally, most evidence of, if we look at the evidence of spontaneous psi experiences, we'll find that it suggests that their manifestation is closely related to the emotional system. This was proposed by Richard Brockton. And actually, the emotional system is also highly conserved throughout the evolutionary history of vertebrates. So all of this leads us to the big question: which way to side? We can, so far, we can say that at some point in animal evolutionary history, the ability to obtain information and perhaps also to affect matter without the use of conventional senses must have emerged. And we have two possible hypotheses. One is the independent origin of psi. This means, well, if we look, these are some of the groups of animals in which psi has been detected. And we could hypothesize something like this, that in this case, the blue square refers to psi, that psi emerge independently in each of these groups. But this is a very elaborated hypothesis, and if we look at the evolution of many of shared structures between these groups, we will find that they arose only once before the divergence of this group. So it would look something like this, in which before the divergence of vertebrates, psi emerged in the proto-vertebrates, and then it evolved in a similar way in many of these groups, or also it could be in all of them. And the reason you might think that why, well, there are no reptiles, there are no amphibians. Uh, uh, there, this could be probably because there experiments in these specific groups have not been successfully performed, or not many people are looking at these animals, but also that this capacity was lost in these groups. We don't know so far. So what would a biological basis of psi imply? We would not, the brain components mediating it are very likely to have been subjected to evolutionary forces, and we would not expect variations in different groups of vertebrates. We would not expect that psi, for psi to have remained unchanged since its origin, but we would expect variations in different groups of vertebrates, and these variations could be linked to different manifestations of psi in different groups of organisms and to specific organization of involved brain components. And despite a wide spectrum in the degree of complexity of the vertebrate brain, there is a core of elements which are common to all of them at the genetic, cellular, and connectivity levels. So you might wonder which evolutionary force might be behind psi. And if we look at the experimental results from thousands of experiments of parapsychology, well, we will find a lot of things, but I think the most important are this one, that most people show some level of psi, and only very few show no degree at all, or are true prodigies. So if we plot this, we would have something that resembles a normal distribution, in which at the extremes of this graph, we will have people with no side at all and true prodigies over there. And this makes a lot of sense because, well, in the selection, natural selection could be selecting against those kind of organisms, because if you have no psi at all, it could be a disadvantage when facing specific situations that would require some psi-related processes, such as intuition. And also, if you are always receiving information all the time through your mind, it could be a situation so overwhelming that you won't be able to function properly. And so this trait could be explained by stabilizing selection, which is a type of natural selection, okay, which favors the intermediate phenotype, like human birth weight, plant height, the number of eggs laid by a female bear, among many others. And this is the last one. I think that more light on the possible origin and evolution of this outstanding capability could be shed by first identifying the brain regions that are activated during psychic functioning. Some efforts have been made specifically using fMRI. And well, I think that these techniques will advance in the near future. And once identified, gene expression profiles could be made using techniques like microarrays or RNA sequencing to try to identify which genes are expressed in those specific brain regions. And once we have that, phylogenetic analysis could be performed with the genes located not only in humans, but also in every vertebrate that you can imagine. And by comparing their distribution and analyzing their substitution rates, we could obtain a wider picture of their divergence and their evolutionary trajectory. And that's pretty much it. Thank you all for listening.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, interesting talk. And I would like to ask you, I'm not sure if you know Jim Carpenter's first site model theory. Jim Carpenter's, yeah. So he assumes that, or he parallels psi function to subliminal perception in a way. And would you say this is compatible with your model? I'm not sure. I'm not in neuroanatomy of the brain. Could you link this to your idea of psi?
Yeah, well, I can only speculate at this point, but I think it's compatible, especially regarding the uh, the way of the evolution of these brain compounds. Well, if natural selection is operating in the evolution of psi, it's obvious that it is doing it at the level of the brain components that mediate psi. So as we look at it, this might have to do with what you asked, because psi being an unconscious process is in well, it's what seems to be the best mode of action, because if it wasn't unconscious and you were receiving information all the time and something like that, well, you could be overwhelmed by all of this information. So probably evolution found a way to keep psi subjected to only to unconscious process and to emerge only under very specific situation and not all the time.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We just finished, I really appreciated seeing that emotional piece when you had all the animals laid out in the emotional system. So we just finished a pilot study looking at structural neuroimaging and in 47 people, and they filled out a questionnaire of their psi experiences, and the amygdala and the hippocampus were two areas that popped up of having an association with increased psi phenomenon. So I thought you might like to hear that, and we're following up with a larger study to hopefully see what that shows.
Oh, well, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, because well, amygdala is here is precisely the distribution of amygdala, yeah, in basically every vertebrate, from reptiles, mice, cats, dogs, and obviously humans. The I didn't consider amygdala because amygdala may not be as ancient as some people would think. Yeah, it is highly conserved in many vertebrate groups, but not quite ancient like structures such as the basal ganglia and the brain stem and the reticular formation. It appeared a little bit later in evolution. So, well, I'm not saying that amygdala has nothing to do with psi. I'm just, well, it might actually have. I think that the most likely scenario is that psi is mediated by a group of different components and not just a single structure. And yeah, amygdala could be like a mediator in this whole system. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. To my knowledge, the first person who introduced the term consilience to explain biological phenomena was Ed Wilson, the Harvard entomologist in the 60s. And the fact that he worked with ants and some other insects is quite relevant, because we are in your model, if I may, I think that you're not considering I don't know if you're considering this or not, but I need to point out that basically evolution created the brain twice. Once is when we create the brain of the vertebrates that we separated from, differentiated about 6 million years ago, is quite different to the brain of the invertebrates, the insects and mollusks, that was developed over 600 million years ago.
Yeah.
And the brain of the insects themselves organize in colonies. Insects do not live individual lives. And the main examples of these are the beehive and the anthill that work as a collective consciousness, if you will. So an anthill may live 40 or 50 years, a large one. And the social rules that regulate the early anthill are totally different from the one that regulate the mature and the old anthill, even when thousands of generations of ants have passed. So we know a lot about how ants can pass information to each other through chemicals, through pheromones, through all those things. But we know nothing, and I truly mean nothing, about the rules that regulate the collective behavior of beehives and anthill as a single organism. That relates and that resembles, I'm not saying it does, that resembles a lot of psi functions in a way. The octopus, an octopus has 9 brains, right? Has one central brain, and one brain for each one of their tentacles, their arms. And each one of them behaves as a single separate entity, and the octopus itself is a collective consciousness, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So, and it has been shown that that some octopus can foresee into the short future. So I think that we need to basically consider any model that includes or that wants to consider the evolutionary aspects of psi, not only the vertebrate brain, that again is evolutionary very different from the brain that insects and mollusks share.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. Yeah, but there are many other animals that.
Oh, you can, just a couple of seconds because I want to get the last question in.
Okay.
So.
There are many other non-vertebrates that show this behavior, as you mentioned. So, well, it could not be the first time that a trait evolved differently, but this is something that in evolutionary biology is called convergence, like the wings, which have evolved in bats, in birds, and in insects, and has nothing to do with each other. So, I think that this is very possible if we consider the useful that psi is could be a very useful ability for basically every organism. Well, we do not have this collective this way of behaving like ants or other social insects, but it could be we might also, if we somewhere in the future find some structure related to psi, and we look at the specific genes, we can look for these genes and in many other animals, and it is likely that we will find homologous sequences of that genes.
Okay, we're going to have one more question. Stanley, would you like to ask your question? Stanley, would you like to ask your question?
Pardon me for a bit of self-promotion, but there is going to be an exhaustive review of psi phenomena and evolutionary psychology in the next issue of a little volume I co-edit, Advances in Parapsychological Research. Thank you for the presentation, which I think is really a big breakthrough for the field.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Kriebner. It means a lot to me to hear these words from you, and I'm looking forward to that review that you mentioned. And yeah, it's definitely the field of evolutionary psychology, which also is not many academics see it as a, well, they put it at the same level of parapsychology. Well, I think that if we look at this sort of things, this sort of evidence, it may tell us a lot that we don't know about ourselves, and also our evolution and the evolution of our ancestors, including. So thank you so much, Dr. Stanley Griffin.